All right. Well, for today's interview and conversation, I'm chatting with Sherif Rizk. He's a principal lawyer and founder of Rizk Law Office, where he specializes in civil litigation and matters of fraud and fraud examination. Sherif is also running for city council in the upcoming 2026 municipal elections in Ward 1, which is Orleans, East-Cumberland, and not too far from where I am sitting today. And he has generously stepped forward with both a donation to our mental health campaign for small business, but also wants to be able to amplify the importance of mental health in our city as part of a broader platform that he'll spend probably a little bit of time talking to us about today. Thank you very much, Sherif, for joining me today and for certainly for donating, but also for using your voice in our community for this and many other issues. I know you're an important advocate in your community, including for issues of youth and accessible services and business development. So all of those things, I think, converge nicely with what we're trying to do with our campaign. Um, Maybe by starting off, Sherif, just a simple kind of warm-up question. Can you give me a bit of an overview as to maybe first who you are, what your priorities are, and but focus on what your commitment to the cause of mental health is and community development and so on, and then we can go into some other questions after that.
Absolutely. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with you. When we first connected and we had an opportunity to do a bit of a brief chat about what this conversation could entail, I was just filled with so much excitement and optimism about it, and really looking forward to this. So I'm really glad to be here with you. In terms of who I am, well, as you mentioned, I am the principal lawyer and founder of my own practice, Rizk Law Office. I started it in 2018. So we're going on 8 years strong now. I've been practicing as a lawyer for a little bit longer than that. And in that span of time, my practice has involved a lot of different kinds of cases, all really kind of geared towards helping clients, which is nothing all that special. But at the same time, we try to do it with a very like human element. Like we really try to, instead of looking at the client as a file or like we really try to look at what it is that this person needs, not just to assess what their litigation needs are or whatnot, but really asking ourselves like what would be in the best interests for this person overall. So, to kind of give you an example, like one of the things that I'm always assessing is, sure, we've got a client who's got a very strong case. Let's say that, if this case goes to trial, may have a very, very good outcome, very high financial outcome, particularly. But then there's still the question of what would litigation on this case for years do to this client? Litigation, no matter how certain an outcome might seem, can take a huge toll on somebody. And I'm not saying that to say that, this is grounds for us to settle a case, even though we have a good chance. But it's just about pausing sometimes and asking that question. And that's something that I see clients really appreciate, and something that I think that's the reason why we've been so successful is that like clients see the working relationship that we have with them, and we try our best not to treat them as just a file. So that's something that I've been really focused on doing, and it's something that also I've been trying to make sure that I emphasize whenever I'm, working with any members of my staff, or I also mentor a lot of different young lawyers who are entering the profession either in their articling stage or even before that, and there's even some like recently called lawyers. And I always try to emphasize to them like, yeah, this job is great and it has fantastic or like really up a lot of upsides to it, but you got to also make sure to prioritize your mental health,
Mm.
just because it's a tough adversarial environment to be in. And if you don't take the opportunity to think about how far or how deep you are into the litigation rabbit hole in particular, it can really take an effect on you. So, that's what I try to bring to the table in terms of my practice, in terms of the people that I work with, and for my clients. And at the end of the day, like mental health for me personally has become very important as well. I've been working on that for the last couple of years with a therapist, and I'm very happy with what I've seen, the progress that I've seen, and there's still obviously work to do, but it's become such an important part of my life.
Yeah, well, thank you for being so candid about your own experience. I'm the same way. Let me unpack a little bit about the point you're making around the nature of your profession, and also, so I think there's two elements that are probably highly interconnected for you. There's the stress and the mental health pressures that come with owning a business and having, everything on your shoulders. But then you also happen to be in a high stress, highly adversarial profession like law, that, as you say, takes a toll on your mental health if you're not careful. So talk to me a little bit about what that pressure looks like for you or for other lawyers, and how that might affect those in the profession, and what are some of the strategies you've used to help either others navigate that or even yourself.
Yeah. That's a very good question. I mean, I think any business owner will tell you like especially for people whose business is built about around getting clients, there's
Mhm.
always that concern that's lingering in the back of your mind will that phone ring, or is anybody going to walk through the door? And that reality is there also for lawyers. I think some people have that impression that like, every lawyer out there is busy. I mean, certainly there are busy lawyers out there, but like when you're starting out on your own, especially after that excitement of, I'm now have my own practice and whatnot, once that excitement dies down, and that's really when you start to wonder, like, did I make a mistake here or not?
Mhm.
And so that reality is there, and I've come to find that it doesn't really go away in the sense of like, I've been doing this, I've been out on my own now for almost 8 years, and I still have that fear in the back of my mind. It's maybe not as present, but I still do worry. And so I think as a business owner in general, um, part of mental health is understanding that those fears may never really go away, but you have to make your peace with them.
Yeah, good
Um,
point.
yeah, it's one of those things that I think therapy in particular has been very helpful for me because there's this notion that if I'm not thinking about the worst case scenario and if I'm not preparing for it, then I'm not doing enough. Well, it's like, well, that's what's gonna eat away at your mental health is to be constantly sitting there and thinking about the worst case scenario. And I
Mhm.
mean, speaking of thinking about the worst case scenario, like that's why people hire lawyers is to be like that's why we are hired sometimes is to think about, I want you to think about the worst case scenario, and so and accordingly prepare for it. And so when that's also like your job, when that's like your livelihood, it becomes such a natural place for you to go from a mental health
Yeah.
perspective. And so I feel sometimes like lawyers are particularly susceptible to that. And then, as you kind of mentioned, like this is especially the problem for litigation lawyers, is that you're bringing all of that into a courtroom setting where you're I don't want to say facing off because it's not quite the right word, but you're going into a court of law trying to argue for your client's cause, and sometimes that strategy requires for you to tear down the other side's
Mhm.
arguments.
Mhm.
Um, and when you have so much invested, let's say in a particular case, whether that's because you believe in that client's cause or whether it's because, well, this case has to work out in a certain way because, this is going to mean a good financial payoff for me or whatever the case may be. Those arguments that you hear from the other side, they don't land as if they're just arguments. They land almost as personal attacks.
Personal. Yeah.
And that's the challenge. That's the challenge that comes with this job, and that's the challenge that comes with, how do you navigate being a business owner, being a lawyer in particular, in this tough adversarial environment, and also keep your mental health. And you know, I don't want to give you the impression that I figured it out.
No one has.
I'm still kind of working on it. There are still, you know, certain cases or certain lawyers that will say or do something that I find myself having to ground myself again. And so this is not one of those things where I think anybody really fully figures it out. It's just more like the as you continue to navigate it, you you learn to roll with the waves. You learn to also identify the things that say, you know, this doesn't bother me as much, and so I'm not going to give it the time of day. And the things that do bother you, you just have to kind of learn how to cope with it, learn how to
Yeah.
manage that so that you can move on.
Yeah, I want to underscore something you've said because though I never really connected the dot, I do risk management for a living. I'm not a lawyer. You do law. You're looking at legal risk all the time. But when you said you're always looking for the worst case scenario, according to your profession, your goal as an as a professional, I'm exactly the same way. And I've often said that, in fact, to my kids, that turns me into a very risk averse person, ironically. But also it does allow for certain anxiety to take hold if you're not careful, right? So that in those kinds of professions where you are called upon to imagine and manage it's sort of the negatives, and that can take you down. Never mind in your case, as you're saying, the adversarial nature of your profession as well. So that's a
Yeah.
really, really good point, and I know I've suffered from that as well. Um, you also happen to be you talked about mentoring young lawyers, and you also do things with youth in the community. I don't know if it's just the Coptic community that you work with or if there's others. When you look at the community at large, of either young lawyers or young people, are there factors that you think are particularly problematic that could be risk factors for our youth in terms of their own mental health? And if so, how do you advise them as you do your mentoring?
Yeah, well, I'm actually glad you brought this up because, you know, for me, youth mentorship is like I've come to realize it's something that I really enjoy and every person I think that comes to me and says, you know, I'm looking for guidance on this or I'm looking to work with you or whatnot. Even if I can't necessarily give them what they're asking for, I always try to give them something of benefit. And the reason why is because, you know, when I was a young lawyer myself, um, I I I was in a situation where essentially I eventually found out that I was being taken advantage of, and it led to a huge problem that probably had there been a mentor to guide me from the outset. I mean, I don't know how the outcome would have looked. I'm not saying it would have been completely avoided, but maybe it wouldn't have been as detrimental as it was back then. So I try my best to at least give that voice of guidance to anybody that comes my way, and you know, I try not to project my story or my experience onto them. Sometimes it's really just about, you know, let's listen and see what it is that like where you are at the moment. What are your concerns? To give you an example, you know, I recently met with a lovely young lady who is, I think she has the brightest future ahead of her. And she's so passionate about, you know, she wants to go into law school and she's so focused on just like the mechanics of getting into law school, you know, like I got to do the LSAT, I got to do this, I got to do that. And it's wonderful. She's laser focused on her goal and that's why I'm confident she'll do great. Um, but then, you know, when she came to me and she was asking me some questions, I asked her a very basic one, which was, why do you want to do this?
Mhm.
And I could see that the gears were shifting, trying to find an answer that wasn't quite there yet or wasn't quite formulated. Um, and, you know, I think this relates to mental health because it is an actual, like, an aspect of mental health is not just about, you know, taking care of your body or your mind and so on. It's also, I think, about just figuring out your purpose, figuring out the question of your why. Um, and, you know, like if we take this example, like, you know, this particular young lady may have an answer today about why she wants to go into law. that might change in the future. And I've explained that to her. But just having that answer being fully fleshed out, at least where she is at the moment, can help somebody guide them through some of the more difficult times, right? And back to your original question about like what's the risk factor that I see with young people, I think that's part of it is that like they have incredible minds, they have incredible skill sets, they have incredible drive to really achieve a lot of fantastic things, but because they're so focused on the mechanics, they sometimes don't put the effort that's needed to finding out their why.
Yeah.
And when life tests you, when life throws the tough questions at you or the tough circumstances, not having that fully figured out really affects mental health.
Yeah. I think, and it affects mental health and it affects their ability to be resilient in the
Hmm.
face of it, right? It's that sort of true, I love that idea that we all need our true north, whether that's in our career, or our profession, or even our values as human beings when, what kind of life we want to lead. I think that's a really important takeaway, Sharif. I think, because you're right, it provides you this sort of, not an anchor. An anchor suggests pulling you down, but it keeps you grounded, in
Yeah.
that way. That's a really, really good insight. Let me broaden out the discussion a little bit and talk about your campaign to run for municipal council. I've taken a little bit of a look at your platform, and I know we've had a conversation about it already in terms of what your vision is for your role as a community leader. Talk to me a little bit about, when you look at what is needed in our community more generally in terms of either services or a certain approach to community development and service accessibility of services. Talk to me about some of your priorities and how they might intersect with what we're talking about in terms of mental health.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that you took taking a look at the platform. The platform is obviously geared towards what I think are the concerns and the needs of Ward 1 specifically where I'm running. But I think it touches also on things that might come across in different wards or different parts of the city. But one thing that I'm particularly keen on trying to push for and advocate for is a what I call a youth civil service core
Mm,
program. In my experience, I always get a ton of these applications or emails from youth just so eager to gain practical experience, and I really really wish I had all the space and the funding and everything to be able to hire them or to be able to work with them in some capacity, but I simply don't. And when I was thinking about, well, okay, if I as a business owner am getting this volume, surely other businesses are as well. And there's an energy to capture in doing so. Like there's an energy there. There's a need for the community to be for people in the community to be involved. And so the idea behind this program would be to create something formal through the municipality that creates kind of like an established core of youth that are there, that are ready to work, to gain practical experience. Depending on the kind of funding they get, may even be getting some sort of a payment. And the idea behind it is that, like, regardless of your level of experience or whatever your interests are, that you should be able to come and to help in a meaningful way in the community,
mhm,
right? And I know some people might think, well, there's already sort of similar city programs in that, for example, you can work with the city for summer programs and to be like a camp leader or a recreational program leader, and that's wonderful, and I commend those programs. But the idea behind this as well is to say, look, these are people that are willing to do more than that. They're willing to really contribute in meaningful way and to get experience working, whether it's in like administrative capacities within the city, whether that's assisting the elderly, right? There's so many different avenues in which we can, I think, implement this program, and it creates something of a formal, structured way, something for it to capture that youth energy, and not just kind of directed towards recreational programs. Um, a part of it too is, I think, showing the youth that express a desire to join this program is that you're part of this community, right?
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
grounding their identity in that community as well as, I think, the key part here. We can talk about what civic pride means, or whether, like, what role does it play in society. But at the end of the day, I think we all would benefit from just knowing that we belong to a community. And we can talk about that in an abstract sense, or we can talk about it in a realistic, like, let's get to work and let's do
Yeah.
something together that can really deliver for the community.
Yeah.
Um, all of that, I think, I mean, I don't want to hit the nail on the head too much here, but all of that, I think, would serve mental health from a public perspective in a very positive way. We're talking about, we're living actually in a time where youth unemployment is among the
Mhm.
highest that we've seen. And, whether that's directly correlated with the mental health crisis that we see at large or not, again, we can have that debate, but I don't see how something like that wouldn't help.
Yeah. I love that idea. I have to say, and if I can tie some things together, I mean, I think that it speaks to what you were talking about earlier about having that grounding and that true sense of purpose. It builds that. Um, Knowing, being a mother of three kids, one of whom has managed and lived with mental illness for some time now, the notion of community, and it's a big word for me too, like the notion of building a community that supports these youth, but also having a community, having them contribute to the community as well, and having that purpose is so vital. And I would say, even for me, I know when my daughter was, I've talked about this in another interview, but when my daughter was going through her illness, I felt very alone. And because I happen to be an entrepreneur, because I happen to be from a traditional background, Lebanese Irish background, it was, I can keep it all together. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Everything's fine. Don't look over here. It was when I realized that I needed my community that I got healthy, that I
Mhm.
was a better mom for Kennedy in terms of that. So that notion of community has got so many important, obviously, from a municipal perspective, and what you're trying to do by running for city council is, there's an obvious connection to building the community. But you're right, from a mental health perspective, having that village, if I can say,
Mhm.
that virtual village around all of us, and having young people have something to contribute to is really critical. Yeah, I love that.
I
I'm very,
agree.
very
I
supportive
agree.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned, especially, like, there's certain, like, whether it's minority communities or whatnot, like,
Yeah.
there's already communities out there where, people can generally feel a part of and can enter without necessarily having second thought. Like, you mentioned earlier, like, I'm part of the Coptic community.
Yeah.
Was blessed to have a wonderful church community that I, served with in terms of summer camp, Sunday school, etc. And I know and I understand that there may be some people that might look at that and think, it's not for me, or that's not the community necessarily that I want to be a part of. But everyone, I think, still has a role to play, and it shouldn't
Yeah.
be like that kind of role that you can play in the community shouldn't be only based on whether you belong to a certain group or not. It
Yeah.
should be something that should be accessible and available to all.
Yeah. Let me ask you, this might put you on the spot a little bit, but I've often, and I'm very proud of my heritage. Again, my mom is Irish, my dad was Lebanese, both very traditional cultures, and raised as a child of immigrants. I've talked a lot about this in different parts of our campaign, that it creates in you a certain sense of perfectionism, a certain um, uh, and it served me very well. But it's high expectations from both my parents and from the community from which I came, which the downside of which sometimes, and I would say probably more on the Lebanese side than the Irish side, um, hold it together. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Don't admit if you have a problem. Solve it within the family. That kind of thing. All very well intentioned. if you were to speak to minority communities, whether it's the Coptic community or any other minority community, doesn't even need to be ethnic, are there um, are there barriers that you see that we need to continue to work for? I mean, you've been very candid about even having a therapist and stuff, which is fantastic. That may be generational too, but are there minority community elements there that we still have to work to?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because I mean, in talking to some of my friends and some people that I know who've been comfortable enough to share about this, like I am seeing a shift in the sense that like second and third generation immigrants or people who are the sons of immigrants and daughters of immigrants, I think are more comfortable speaking out about the kind of issues that they may face, mental health or otherwise, and also open about seeking that kind of treatment. You know, personally, I think it's more of an issue, I think, for people who either have that mentality that this is stuff that we don't talk about and it's something that perhaps they've inherited or something that they grew up with and it's now kind of difficult to address or difficult to talk about. Um, you know, I don't know if there's anything that I would necessarily say as far as a solution that I can offer. I know that certainly talking about it and removing that stigma can certainly go a long way. But the thing about mental health too, and like, you know, somebody seeking therapy is it's one of those things where yes, you can talk to somebody about it and like try to convince them that it might be good and they may try it once or twice, but it really does have to come from an internal conviction of this is going to be good for me. This is going to help me become a better person, or just help me at least feel more connected to who I am, or help me even understand why it is that I have certain ways of thinking, right? So I would say that you know, there's not much that I would really say as far as a solution other than to simply talk about it. You know, and if that leads to that person at least making some effort or taking some initiative to at least say, you know what, I'll try it once, even if they don't necessarily follow through with it, or if they do something in the privacy of, you know, the privacy and the comfort of, you know, their own home or whatnot, that's good too. That's a
Yeah.
wonderful thing as well. And I mean, I'm always trying to explain it to you know, I have clients sometimes who have that kind of mentality of like, you know, no, I can't necessarily be talking about this. And it's like, well, you know, you just went through a traumatic event like a motor vehicle accident. And, you know, sure, we can talk about treating your physical injuries, but
Mm-hmm.
we have to talk about your mental health as being one of those injuries as well that needs to be addressed.
Yep.
And
Yep.
sometimes they like I can see sometimes that shifts some gears in their mind. So perhaps part of the solution might be how it is that we talk about mental health and compare it, let's say, to physical injuries.
Exactly.
So,
Mental health is health.
yep,
Yeah.
yep,
And I think, you know, what you are talking about is you're right. People have to be responsible for their own care. But what we can do as a community, maybe I'll use this as a segue to my last question. Talking about it, this is what we wanted to do with our campaign, was to be open and candid and brave in having community leaders talk openly about not even about their own issues, but about the power of um, services and the power of talking and destigmatizing, demystifying some of these issues. That's what social change, you know, how social change happens. So that's, I think, what we're doing here is
mhm,
going to go a long way. Let me ask you then, perhaps, Sherif, my final question. I'd like to wrap up all of these interviews with sort of my interviewees' call to action. If you had to give advice to other lawyers or to other business people or other municipal community leaders on matters of mental health or addiction or community resilience, um, what would you ask them to focus on? What would be your call to action for your community in this area?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think I always look at this as before I ask someone else to do something, I assess whether I'm doing that thing.
Mm,
If I'm asking somebody to um, take better care of their health, generally speaking, well, it's kind of like the what goes for the gander goes for the goose, as they say. Like, are you doing the same thing? Are you putting in the effort yourself? So, I think what I would say is, when it comes to calling on others to take care of their mental health, I think it's important just to address it and say, like, we can talk about this in an abstract sense,
mhm.
or we can talk about it in a realistic sense. And I think the most realistic sense is to say, yes, I'm a human being. I'm imperfect. I have things that I need to work on, and I'm at least being open and saying I'm working. I'm actively working on these things. Um, and I think that's just where it starts.
Yeah.
Like, we shouldn't be looking at this to say that anybody has figured it out. And again, I want to make it very clear in terms of what I'm saying here to you today. I don't want to give anybody the impression that I have it figured out or that I have it all together. I'm still the kind of person that, if an email comes in and it's got a certain name on it, or it pertains to a particular subject, I still feel my heart drop. So it's still a work in progress,
Yeah.
and that may always be the case. That I may always be a work in progress when it comes to mental health. But what I would say is, in terms of my call to action, is invest that time and that effort into yourself, and be open and honest about that work that you're doing in yourself. Maybe that's all we need to do in order to encourage others to also take that seriously.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I would agree completely. And I think this is why I'm so happy that you've been involved in this campaign, because what we've been able to do so far collectively is to kind of go, we all look like we have it all together, all these business owners and community leaders, but guess what? We're infallible, we're human, and maybe giving people and other business owners especially, giving them license to have these kinds of conversations. To not only are we setting the example, then we're encouraging them to set examples, to say, you know what, guys, this is not easy. As a business owner, as a lawyer, as a risk manager, as a mom, as a dad, whatever, like, let's give ourselves a little bit of grace and work together. And I really want to underscore the conversation we had today around the importance of community, not only for ourselves, but for our young people in the city. I think that's all really, really important messaging that we can continue to deliver, and then hopefully see that embedded in our community services and our the approach and the programs that we have to support a resilient Ottawa. So
I agree. I
really,
agree.
really helpful. So we can wrap it on that, Sherif. I wanted to thank you very, very much, not only for your donation, but for your time, and for helping me to amplify some of these really important messages, and for getting the word out to a different community that we've been able to talk to so far, which is the legal community, and making sure, that we're having these discussions across all sectors. So uh,
I, I want to thank you so much for inviting me. Like I said, I've been looking forward to this conversation, and really, really excited to be, part of the conversation. And I want to thank you for the opportunity also to discuss, like, some of the priorities that I have. I think this is a wonderful initiative, and I hope to continue to see it to grow and to do a lot of good in the community.
For sure. Well, thank you very much, and good luck on your campaign. Really looking forward to seeing how it turns out for you.
Thank you. Hopefully you'll come and knock on some doors with
I
us, right?
will. I will, for sure. For sure. Awesome.